My wife's a hippie, and she forced me to make this for her. You know that old saying that opposites attract? It's 100% true. My wife and I, complete opposites. She loves the 60s and the hippies and all that stuff. She was going through the laser room and she saw our VW bus that we had. So she said, "You're making me a sign." So we made a deal. I will carve the sign, but she's got to do all the artistic painting stuff. So that's what we ended up doing. So for this sign, we're using our hippie bus and we're using the 1.5" fatty font, which goes perfect for this kind of style of sign. So if you guys don't know, we have a website, makeawoodsign.com, where we have hundreds of templates and stencils and letter and number sets, plus all of our bits, base plates, everything. So go check out makeawoodsign.com and see if there's anything you like. We'll put links in the description below for everything that we use today, plus a lot more. And also don't forget, we have our tagged products for all the stuff that we are specifically using today. All right, let's make some sawdust. For this sign, we're using 2 pieces of blue pine shiplap that were stripped down and glued together. Now, I want an arch on the top and an arch on the bottom with the hippie bus in the middle. So I got the hippie bus centered, and then I made even spacing between the bottom of my bottom line and the top of my top line. Now, because this is going to be arched, you want to make sure to do that in the middle of the board. When you're using an arch, it's really pretty easy. Once you get where your arch needs to go, then you just measure both sides of it to make sure that it's even and draw your line. Honestly, it makes it a lot nicer to do it when you have the arch, as opposed to trying to find something that will fit that particular board. I'll leave a link in the description for our arches, and man, they make the layout way easier. I almost screwed up here and spelled hippie wrong, so when you're laying out a board, make sure you check your spelling. So you can see that both these lines are the exact same space from the left, from the right, from the top, and from the bottom. And once that was all done, I just sprayed it with our primer. Being careful not to overspray and being careful not to get the can so close to the board that the pressure pushes those letters all over the place. That's happened a lot and it's incredibly irritating. Real quick guys, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and the like button. We're putting out a bunch of content and we are really trying to hit 100,000 subscribers this year, so do us a solid. So I started off with my profile bit at 1/8 of an inch deep for the hippie bus. Now this was kind of one of those deals where I could have used the carving liner because these are some fairly small lines. Well, actually some of them are real small, but I decided to go with the profile bit and it worked out. One thing to remember about these bits is that they are V-grooves. So basically the shallower you go, then the narrower the line will be. So as you go deeper, it's going to make a wider line. That's why I started out at 1/8 of an inch deep, which is pretty shallow for us. Now when you're carving lines that are smaller than your actual router bit, for me personally, I don't like to try to stay in the middle of the line when at all possible. What I do is I find one edge of the line, and it's usually the left edge, and then I follow that all the way around. So I'm taking out all of the line plus just a little bit more. And that worked out really well for this hippie bus. Now where the windshield is, those are some really, really fine lines. So I actually carved quite a bit wider than the template lines itself. Because when you're dealing with pine and redwood and things like that, you have a risk of chipping out. So if you have an outset piece that's really thin, you're taking a big risk that it's all going to chip out. So when you have super thin lines like that, don't be afraid to make them a little bit wider than the layout itself is. It's not going to be a big enough difference for anybody to notice. Then once all my cutting at 1/8 of an inch was done, I dropped it down to about 3/16 and I went in and gave myself some more room in the areas that I'm going to take out with the 60-degree bit. The next bit I'm using is our 60-degree bit at 3/16 of an inch deep. Now our 60-degree bit is one of our best cutting bits. This thing is a beast, but there is one kind of downfall. You have to be careful not to have it so deep that it actually sinks into the board farther than your flutes can cut. So it's right between 3/16 and 1/4 of an inch deep. You got to kind of find that sweet spot, especially once you have it sharpened a few times, because that changes the angle of the flutes. But once I found my sweet spot,
then I just started carving. Now the fatty font is perfect for this sort of sign, which is kind of light-hearted, but it's also really good for beginners. This is easy to carve, especially with our 60-degree bit. If you're trying to do something with Clarendon or with Bookman, something like that, with serifs and a lot of straight lines, it gets kind of difficult. So this is my wife's favorite font, actually. Most of the stuff she makes me make her is with this font. It looks good, it's easy to carve, and it's easy to read, which is kind of a big thing, especially if people are going to see the sign from far away. Which actually brings up a good point. Most of the letter and number sets we make are 1 inch, 1.5 inches, and 2 inch, but we make them up to 6 inches wide. So if you have like a big business sign or farm sign, something like that, we got you covered. Once all my inset letters were done, I used that same 60-degree bit to go into all of the open areas of the Hippie bus and just take out the extra wood there. Normally we do that with a 90-degree bit, but I already had this one in. It wasn't very much, and it was kind of some small areas. To round the corners on this sign, I just used our freestanding belt and disc sander and rounded them up. Now this takes a little bit of practice. I've gotten better over the years. Dad is way better than I am. I know they make a ton of jigs, so you can do this with your router, and that comes in handy if you don't have something like this. But if you do have a disc sander that's freestanding and you want rounded corners, I recommend you practice at it because it goes so much faster. Then for the edge, I used our 45-degree chamfer bit. I put a small chamfer on the back and a large chamfer on the front. Now for a long time, I thought putting a chamfer on the back was a waste of time. You didn't need it, but Dad was right. I'll admit it. It gives the sign a much more finished look, and it also helps it last a lot longer. When you have sharp edges, they chip out easier and they crack easier, so just put a chamfer on the back. It makes life better. Once that's all done, then I used our stiff bristle brush and I got all of the extra sawdust out of the carving itself and blew it off to get it ready for spray. I sprayed the back and then I sprayed the front with our primer. Again, don't use paint unless it's flat or matte, but we usually use primer. In fact, we always use primer. Once that dried, then I just sanded it off with a 60 grit disc on our disc sander and 120 grit on our random orbital. Make sure to blow your sign off in between sanding processes, otherwise it could take some of that black sawdust and actually grind it into your finished product. Before we did this, Amy did some practice pieces, and she felt like the unicorn spit actually went on a little bit better when there was a coat or two of light clear on it. So I put 2 coats of clear on it before Amy even started. Now this unicorn spit is awesome stuff. There's a ton of stuff you can do with it. Amy decided to use it as paint. When you're staining and you want to be able to see the grain underneath it, there's a few more things you have to do, and there's a ton of different videos on it. We're still kind of experimenting and playing around with it so we can add some more color. But for this particular one, Amy just wanted to paint it on, which I thought looked really good. The problem is it does look a tad chunky if you're using it as paint. Now when you're using it as stain and you're going to wipe it off and you want to see the grain underneath, there's a lot of different things you can do. One of our friends, Jill, she uses baby wipes, but it was really difficult to do that on this because then it's going to kind of smear all over the board, and that's not what we wanted. As Amy was painting, a lot of the unicorn spit actually got into the carving itself. You can see down by the back fender, and then there's quite a bit up on the roof area that she's going to do where it seeps in and the color bleeds into the, well, it doesn't really bleed, it just drips into the black lines. You want to have sharp lines, so what we found out is we used black unicorn spit on a super fine paintbrush, and we went in there and basically just painted those lines over. It looks good, it gives good clean lines, and you can't tell that it's not the primer we used. There's no difference whatsoever. So that helped out a lot. For the surfboard, Amy wanted kind of this sunburst color, so she put all the different colors on there and then just kind of smeared them around with a paper towel, and it turned out really cool looking.
I'm actually really surprised with how much I like this sign. I think it turned out really good. Amy did an awesome job. She used that unicorn spit and she used it more like paint, but she really did a good job on there. I told her it looks to me more like tie-dye camo instead of regular tie-dye, so I think I'm wearing off on her a little bit. We'll get her out of this hippie phase. All right, guys. As always, there's links in the description below for everything we use today, plus a whole lot more. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you have any questions, shoot me an email, ryan@makeawwoodsign.com, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.